hello there, dear. Come in, come in. Don't you mind the old floorboards? They groan more than I do these days. Let me just pour you a cup. There we are. Earl Grey, with a little slice of lemon, just how I like it. The rain is coming down, something fierce today, isn't it? Listen to it, drumming on the window pane. It's that sound, you know, that and the smell of wet roses from the garden. It takes me back to a time when a different storm was brewing, one inside my own heart. You look at me now and you see an old woman, with hands spotted by time and more wrinkles than a road map. But these hands, oh, they once held on to a dream so tightly I thought my knuckles would turn to dust. I was just stirring my tea this morning, watching the little whirlpool in the cup, and I saw my locket. This old thing. She touches a small silver locket at her throat. It doesn't open anymore. Hasn't for 60 years. But I know what's inside. A promise. And a ghost. It all started in the summer of 1959. A different world back then. You know, life felt slower, but expectations were faster, if that makes any sense. Girls like me, we were expected to finish school, find a respectable young man, marry, and start a family. Tidy, simple, like a well-kept garden. My father was a great believer in well-kept gardens. He was a proud man, a stern man. He had a way of looking at you over the top of his spectacles that could make you feel like a weed in his prize-winning petunias. He smelled of pipe tobacco and discipline. He loved me, I suppose, in his own rigid way, but he loved his good name more. The name Blackwood meant something in our little town. It meant decency, order, and tradition. And then there was Leo. Leo was none of those things. He was a summer's storm. He worked at his father's garage, and he always had a little smudge of grease on his cheek he'd missed, and his laugh, oh goodness, his laugh wasn't tidy at all. It was loud and free, and it made you want to laugh right along with him, even if you didn't know the joke. He smelled of motor oil and wild mint he chewed on. He wasn't from a family with a name. He was just Leo. And to me, he was everything. We met at the town fair. I'd dropped the tickets for the Ferris wheel, and this hand, this strong, slightly grimy hand, appeared from nowhere and scooped them up. I looked up into these eyes, the color of moss after a rain, and that was it. It was as simple and as complicated as that. The world just shifted. For the rest of that summer, we were inseparable, in secret of course. My father would never have approved. A grease monkey, I heard him scoff once about Leo's father. A man who works with his hands has no time for higher thoughts. But Leo's thoughts felt higher than anyone's I knew. We'd take his father's old truck up to Miller's Ridge, overlooking the whole valley. We wouldn't even talk sometimes. We'd just watch the lights of the town flicker on as dusk settled, a blanket of quiet understanding between us. He never pushed me. He'd just hold my hand, his calloused fingers a perfect contrast to my own. He spoke of traveling, of seeing the ocean. He didn't want a tidy garden. He wanted the whole wild forest. And I wanted to get lost in it with him. He gave me this locket. He'd saved for months to buy it. It wasn't fancy, just simple silver. Inside, he'd managed to cut a tiny picture of us from a photo booth at the fair, our heads close together, grinning like fools. On the other side, he'd clumsily scratched a single word. Always, always became our word. I'll promise. As summer faded into autumn, the colors of the leaves turning as fiery as my feelings for him, we knew we couldn't keep sneaking around. The whispers in town were starting, and my father's gaze was growing colder, more suspicious. He started making comments at the dinner table. Mr. Alistair Finch from the bank was asking after you. Elara, he'd say, not looking at me. His family founded the first mill here. A true gentleman. A man of substance. Alistair Finch was 35, twice my age, and had a face like a closed ledger book. A man of substance. A man of stone. I'd shudder and push the peas around on my plate. My heart belonged in a garage, with the smell of oil and mint. So, Leo and I made a plan. A desperate, beautiful, foolish plan. We would elope. Leo had an uncle who lived in a little coastal town 3 states away. He'd sent Leo some money for his birthday. It wasn't much, but with what I'd saved from my little sewing jobs, it was enough. Enough for 2 train tickets and a new beginning. The day after my 18th birthday. That was the day. We would become Mr. and Mrs. Nobody, and we would have everything. The night before we were to leave was a Tuesday, October the 27th. I'll never forget it. I had my little suitcase packed and hidden under my bed. It held one good dress, a few essentials, and all my hope. I was meant to slip out my window at midnight, where Leo would be waiting by the old oak tree at the edge of our property. The moon was full. It felt like a sign, a spotlight from heaven lighting our way. I sat at my vanity, brushing my hair, my hands trembling with a mixture of terror and exhilarating joy. I looked at the girl in the mirror. She was so young, so naive. She had no idea that her life, the one she had so carefully planned, was about to be burned to the ground. My bedroom door creaked open. It wasn't my mother with a cup of warm milk. It was my father. He didn't knock. He never did. He stood in the doorway, a large, imposing silhouette against the hallway light. The air suddenly felt thick, heavy. The scent of his pipe tobacco filled my room, choking out the sweet smell of my rose-scented soap. "Alara," he said, and his voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was calm. A dead, chilling calm. "We need to talk." He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, and with that soft, simple click of the latch, I felt the world lock me in, and the girl I was began to disappear. The grandfather clock in the downstairs hall began to chime. 10 o'clock. 2 more hours. The sound, usually a comforting, rhythmic heartbeat in our quiet house, now sounded like a death knell. Each chime was a hammer blow against the fragile glass of my secret. My father walked slowly toward the little armchair in the corner of my room, the floral one where my mother would sometimes sit and read to me when I was a child. Seeing his large frame sink into it felt like a violation of something sacred. He didn't speak right away. He just sat there, looking at his hands, then at me. His eyes weren't angry, not in the way I was used to, the flashes of temper over a spilled drink or a poor report card. This was different. This was a deep, cold, calculating stillness. It was the look of a man who held all the cards and was about to lay them on the table, one by one. "I know about your little plan, Lara," he said finally. His voice was low, but it filled the entire room. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. It was a stone dropping down a dark, bottomless well. How could he know? I'd told no one. Leo had told no one. We had been so careful. I opened my mouth to deny it, to lie, but the words wouldn't come out. My throat was tight, dry. I could only stare at him, my reflection in his spectacles showing a pale, terrified girl. "You think you're in love," he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement of my foolishness. "You think that boy, that mechanic's son, can give you a life. You think love pays the bills. Love puts food on the table. Love maintains a family's reputation, a name that has been respected in this town for 3 generations. He loves me," I whispered, the words sounding small and childish even to my own ears. A small, bitter smile touched his lips. "Love is a luxury for children and fools. He loves what you represent, an escape from his own grimy life. A step up. You are a prize to him, nothing more." "That's not true," I said, a little stronger this time. I had to defend him. I had to defend us. "You don't know him." "Oh, but I do," my father said, leaning forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. The sweet, cloying smell of his tobacco seemed to get stronger. "I know more than you think. I know things about him, about his family." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, thick and menacing. The rain was picking up outside, lashing against the glass. "You see him as a simple boy from a simple family, but there's nothing simple about them. Do you know why his father's garage is struggling so much? Why they're always behind on their rent to the suppliers?" I shook my head, mute. "Because the man is a drunkard and a gambler," he said, his voice dropping with practiced gravity. "He owes money all over town, serious money, to very unsavory people. Your Leo isn't saving up for a future with you, my dear. Every spare penny he makes is going to pay off his father's debts, to stop men from coming to their door and breaking his kneecaps." The image was so violent, so ugly, it made me flinch. No, Leo would have told me, would he? My father countered smoothly. Would he tell the pretty, respectable girl from the good family that his own is rotten to the core? Would he admit that shame? Or would he spin a fairy tale about seeing the ocean, about a new life, hoping your family's money and connections could be his salvation? My world was tilting. The floor felt unsteady beneath my feet. This couldn't be true. It was a lie, a cruel, calculated lie to stop me. But my father's face was so earnest, so full of Was it pity? He looked at me as if I were a sick child who didn't understand the bitter taste of the medicine she had to swallow. That's not all, he continued, his voice relentless. The boy himself, he's not the saint you imagine. He was in trouble last spring. A fight down at the tavern. A bad one. A man was hurt. Badly. I had to speak to Sheriff Miller myself. Pull some strings to have the charges dropped. To keep the boy's name out of the paper. I did it to protect our family from the shame of your association with him. My mind raced. I remembered a week in April, when Leo had been distant. He'd had a bruised knuckle he said he'd gotten from a slipped wrench. He'd seemed worried, but a fight? A man badly hurt? Leo, my gentle Leo, it didn't fit. I did it for you, Elara, to protect you, my father said, his voice softening, becoming almost paternal, almost kind. It was the most dangerous weapon he had. I see you are disappointed, heartbroken, even. It is better to feel that pain now, in the safety of your own home, than to find all this out when you are 3 states away, with no money, no family, and tied to a boy who was dragging the anchor of his family's shame behind him. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. I was a ship, and he was telling me my anchor was rotten. My safe harbor was a lie. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto my vanity. It was a receipt, a pawn ticket. He said he bought you that locket, didn't he? My father asked gently. He didn't. He stole it. From his own mother. It was the last nice thing she had from her grandmother. He pawned it last week. I had a friend at the bank redeem it for me. The boy is desperate. He will do anything for money. I stared at the pawn ticket. The date was from 3 days ago. The description read, "One lady's silver locket." I felt the locket at my neck, suddenly cold, heavy, like a stone. Had he lied about that too? The most precious gift, the symbol of his love, was it all just a transaction? Doubt, a terrible poison. It doesn't kill you outright, it just seeps into your veins, slowly, until you can't tell what's real and what's not. My carefully built world of love and trust was crumbling, brick by brick, lie by lie. The image of Leo waiting for me under the oak tree, once a beacon of hope, was now muddled, confused. Was he waiting for me, or for my father's daughter? Was he my hero, or was he just as calculating as the man sitting in my floral armchair? My father stood up, his point made, his work done. He walked to the door. "Your mother laid out your blue dress for church tomorrow. Wear it. Mr. Finch will be joining us for the service." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "This conversation stays between us. It is for your own good. One day, you will understand. You will thank me." He opened the door and left, closing it softly behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed the sound of my heart breaking. I was alone. Alone with his words, with the pawn ticket, with the ghost of a boy I thought I knew. I looked at the clock. It was 10:30. In 90 minutes, the boy I loved or the boy I thought I loved would be waiting for me. And I had no idea what to do. The 90 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The room felt like a cage, the air thick and unbreathable. I paced from my bed to the window, my bare feet silent on the rag rug my grandmother had made. Outside, the rain had softened to a mournful drizzle, the moon obscured by a thick veil of clouds. The world outside was as gray and uncertain as the landscape of my heart. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fly out that window and go to Leo, to confront him, to look into his moss-green eyes and demand the truth. If he lied, I would see it. I knew I would. But my father's words had been like stones thrown into a still pond, and the ripples of doubt were spreading, touching everything. The gambling father, the tavern brawl, the pawned locket, each one was a crack in the foundation of my faith in him. What if my father was right? What if I arrived at that coastal town only to find myself trapped in a different kind of poverty? A poverty of spirit, tied to a man weighed down by a darkness I never knew he carried. My father, for all his sternness, had always provided for us. Our lives were orderly, predictable, safe. He was offering me a continuation of that safety, in the form of Mr. Alistair Finch, a man of substance. I walked over to my vanity and picked up the pawn ticket. It felt flimsy, dirty. I looked at my reflection. My face was blotchy, my eyes swollen. The girl from a few hours ago, the one trembling with joyful anticipation, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone who looked lost and terribly, terribly old. I clutched the locket at my throat. It felt different now. No longer a symbol of always, but a question mark. The clock downstairs chimed 11:30. Then, a quarter to midnight. My body was frozen, caught between two impossible futures. One was a leap into a dark, unknown forest with a guide who might be a liar. The other was a walk down a well-lit, paved road that led somewhere I didn't want to go. Midnight. The hour struck. Each chime, a final, resolute toll. I stood by the window, my hand pressed against the cold glass, and I watched the spot by the old oak tree where my future was supposed to be waiting. Through the mist and the fine rain, I saw a figure step out from the shadows. It was him, Leo. Even from this distance, I could tell it was him. The way he stood, the nervous energy in his posture. He looked up at my window, and I did nothing. I just stood there, hidden in the darkness of my room, and watched him. He waited. 10 minutes. 20. He paced a little, kicking at a loose stone. He looked up at my window again and again. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Just go to him. But my feet felt like lead. My father's voice was a venomous whisper in my ear. A drunkard's son, a brawler, a thief. After what felt like an eternity, he slumped. I saw his shoulders fall in defeat. He lingered for a moment longer, a lonely silhouette in the damp night, and then he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows from which he came. And with him, he took the girl I was, the dreams she had, and the promise of always. I had made my choice. Or rather, I had let my father make it for me. I sank to the floor and wept, not with the loud, cleansing sobs of before, but with silent, shuddering grief for a life that had just died. The next morning, I was an actress in my own life. I came down for breakfast, my eyes puffy but my face a mask of calm. My father gave me a single, approving nod. My mother, bless her innocent heart, fussed over me, saying I looked tired. I put on the blue dress. It felt stiff and unfamiliar. At church, Mr. Alistair Finch was waiting in our pew. He stood up when we arrived. A stiff, formal gesture. He was tall and thin, with pale eyes and hair so neatly parted it looked like it had been drawn on with a ruler. He smelled of mothballs and old paper. He barely looked at me. He spoke to my father in low, serious tones about bank rates and property deeds. I felt like a parcel being discussed before delivery. During the sermon, I just stared at the stained glass window, at the image of a saint with sad, knowing eyes, and I felt nothing. The part of me that could feel had gone walking down the road with Leo last night and had never come back. The weeks that followed were a blur of polite dinners, stilted conversations, and fittings for a wedding dress I had no desire to wear. My father announced my engagement to Alistair Finch a week after that terrible night. The town buzzed with the news. Such a good match, they said. The Blackwoods and the Finches, united at last. They saw it as a merger, a sensible business arrangement, and that's exactly what it was. By the way, dear, as I sit here telling you all this, I get to wondering about you. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? It feels like you're right here with me, but I know you could be anywhere. In this big, wide world, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It makes this old woman feel a little less like she's just talking to the TEAC upstart. So, where was I? Oh yes, the engagement. Alistair was not a cruel man, you understand. He was just absent. He was a man made of duty and obligation. He was marrying me because it was what a man of his station did. He needed a wife to host his dinners and provide him with an heir. It was a role to be filled, and I had been selected for the part. He bought me expensive things, a pearl necklace, a new coat, but he never once asked me what I liked, or what I dreamed of. I don't think it ever occurred to him that I did. The wedding was planned for just after the New Year, a winter wedding. My father was ecstatic. He was in his element, overseeing every detail, a proud general planning, a victorious campaign. He had won. He had secured his daughter's future, and by extension, his own. I learned later that Alistair had quietly arranged to forgive a significant loan my father had taken from the bank. My price had been paid. The night before my wedding, to Alistair, my father came to my room again. This time, he knocked. He found me sitting by the window, looking out at the bare, skeletal branches of the old oak tree. The ground was covered in a thin layer of snow. "Everything is ready for tomorrow," he said, his voice full of satisfaction. "It will be a beautiful day." I didn't turn to look at him. You lied to me, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I had done some asking of my own, quiet, careful questions. I had spoken to the boy who cleaned up at the tavern. There had been a fight, yes. Leo had stepped in to stop it, to defend an old man who was being harassed. He was the hero, not the villain. As for his father, he liked to drink, yes, but he was a broken man, grieving his wife, not a menace. My father had taken small truths and twisted them into monstrous lies. And the locket. I never found out the truth of that pawn ticket. Maybe it was real, maybe it was a forgery. By then, it didn't matter. The damage was done. My father was silent for a moment. I did what was necessary, he said, his voice losing its triumphant edge. I gave you a secure life, a respectable life. You will have everything you could ever need. You took the only thing I ever wanted, I replied, my voice cracking for the first time. You will get over your childish infatuation, he said dismissively. Tomorrow, you will become Mrs. Alistair Finch. You will be the wife of the most important man in this town. And in that marriage, you will do your duty. You will provide him with a son to carry on his name. That is your purpose now. He looked at me then, his daughter, sitting there like a ghost on the eve of her wedding. He had taken my love, my choice, my spirit, and had used it all to his own end. And now he was telling me my final purpose was to become a mother, to bring a child into this cold, loveless world he had built for me. On the eve of what should have been my true wedding, my elopement with Leo, he had instead orchestrated this. In his mind, he had cornered me, trapped me, and used me for the sole purpose of a strategic pregnancy that would secure his own fortunes. That was how it felt. That was the truth of it. I was no longer his daughter. I was his transaction. And my heart, which had already been broken, simply turned to dust. The morning of the wedding was unnaturally bright. The sun glinted off the fresh snow, a brilliant, blinding white that hurt the eyes. It felt like the world was putting on a false, cheerful face, just like I was. My mother and a few aunts fussed around me, a flurry of hands and excited chatter. They pulled and tugged at the wedding dress, a heavy creation of white lace and satin. It felt less like a dress and more like a shroud. The lace tickled my neck, tight and suffocating. "Oh, you're a vision," my Aunt Mildred chirped, pinching my cheek. "Alistair is a lucky, lucky man." I looked at my reflection in the long mirror. The girl staring back was a stranger in an expensive costume. Her eyes were hollow, her smile a painted-on grimace. A vision of what? A vision of obedience. A vision of defeat. I felt a wave of nausea. My father came to walk me down the aisle. He was beaming, dressed in his finest suit, the proud patriarch. He offered me his arm. His touch felt cold, even through the fabric of his coat and my gloves. As we stood at the back of the church, waiting for the organ music to swell, he leaned in close. "Smile, Elara," he whispered, his voice a low command. "Everyone is watching." So, I smiled. I walked down that aisle, on my father's arm, a pretty puppet on a string, my face fixed in a perfect, empty expression. The faces in the pews blurred into a watercolor wash of hats and curious eyes. At the end of the aisle, Alistair was waiting. He looked the same as always, neat, composed, impassive. He took my hand. His was dry and cool, a businesslike exchange. I said the words, "I do." Two of the biggest lies I had ever told. I felt the cold weight of the gold ring slip onto my finger. It felt like a manacle. When the vicar said, "You may kiss the bride," Alistair leaned in and placed a brief, dry kiss on my lips. It had all the passion of a letter being stamped. And just like that, I ceased to be Elara Blackwood. I was Mrs. Alistair Finch. I belonged to him now. Our new home was on the other side of town, a grand, imposing brick house that Alistair had inherited. It was just like him, large, orderly, and utterly silent. The floors were so polished you could see your face in them. The furniture was dark and heavy, covered in dust sheets until my arrival. The air inside was still, and smelled, faintly, of lemon oil and loneliness. A housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a woman as silent and efficient as the house itself, showed me to my rooms. My rooms, not our rooms. The first few months of my marriage were a study in emptiness. Alistair was not unkind. I must be clear on that. He was simply not there. He left for the bank before I woke up and came home long after the sun had set. We ate dinner together in a cavernous dining room, the ticking of the grandfather clock the only sound between us. He would ask me if my day had been satisfactory, and I would say, yes, thank you. And that would be the end of our conversation. He treated me with a sort of detached courtesy, as if I were a valuable antique he had acquired, but didn't quite know what to do with. I spent my days wandering the silent halls of that big house, a ghost in my own life. I read books from his vast, unread library. I sat in the manicured garden where the flowers were beautiful but had no scent. There was no joy, no spontaneity, no life. It was my father's ideal world, a well-kept garden, and I was wilting in it then. About 2 months into the marriage, I started to feel unwell in the mornings. My mother, during one of her weekly visits, noticed it immediately. Her eyes lit up with a knowing, triumphant look that mirrored my father's. A visit to the doctor confirmed it. I was pregnant. When I told Alistair that evening over our silent dinner, he paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. A flicker of something crossed his face. It wasn't joy, it was satisfaction. The same satisfaction my father had shown. Good, he said, and then took a sip of water. That is good news. The transaction was complete. I had fulfilled my primary function. I had conceived the heir. My purpose, as my father had dictated it on the eve of my wedding, was being realized. But instead of feeling any sense of accomplishment or maternal glow, I felt a profound, chilling despair. This child, this tiny, innocent life growing inside me, was not a product of love. It was the result of a contract. It was the living embodiment of my father's betrayal and my own cowardice. How could I love a child born of such cold calculation? The thought terrified me. I would lie awake in my large, empty bed at night, a hand on my still flat stomach, and feel nothing but a dreadful sense of alienation. I felt like a vessel, a container for the Finch family legacy, not a mother. My pregnancy progressed. My body changed, but my heart remained frozen. The town ladies would coo over my growing belly, offering unsolicited advice and happy platitudes. It's the greatest joy a woman can know, they'd say. I would smile and nod. The perfect actress. While inside I was screaming. One afternoon, looking for a book in Alistair's study, I opened a drawer in his desk. Inside, amongst some old account ledgers, was a photograph. It was of a young woman with a laughing, vibrant face and windswept hair. She was beautiful, and she was looking at the camera with an expression of pure, unadulterated love. Tucked beside it was a dried flower, a wild primrose. I had never seen Alistair show any emotion, but the careful preservation of these items spoke volumes. He had loved one. He had known a world outside of duty and ledgers. He had lost it, somehow. Seeing that picture changed something in me. It didn't make me love him, but it made me see him. He wasn't just a cold man of substance. He was a man who had, for his own reasons, locked his heart away, just as I had been forced to. We were two ghosts haunting the same house, each with our own lost love. We were both living a lie. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel anger towards the child inside me. I felt a fierce, desperate wave of protectiveness. This baby, my baby, would not be a ghost. This child would not grow up in a silent house where love was a secret hidden in a drawer. I didn't know how, but I made a vow to that unborn soul right then and there. I would love it enough for 2 people. I would fill its life with enough laughter and joy to make up for the silence. This child would not be the symbol of my father's victory. It would be the reason for my survival. It was the first real choice I had made since the night I watched Leo walk away. And it was a turning point. The ice around my heart didn't melt entirely, but for the first time in a very long time, it began to crack. My son Arthur was born in late September, just as the leaves were beginning to turn. The day was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. He came into the world with a loud, indignant cry, and the moment they placed him in my arms, the world shifted on its axis for the second time in my life. The first time had been when I met Leo. This time, it was different. It wasn't the dizzying, heart-pounding fall of romantic love. It was a deep, seismic shift in the very ground of my being. He was so small, so perfect. He had a thatch of downy brown hair and eyes that were still the cloudy blue of a newborn. I looked at his tiny, clenched fists, and all the bitterness, all the resentment I had harbored about his conception, just evaporated. It didn't matter where he came from. It didn't matter that he was a Finch, or that my father saw him as a trophy. He was mine. He was my son. And in that instant, a fierce, primal love flooded every empty space inside me. It was a love so powerful it was painful. Alistair came to the hospital. He peered into the bassinet with a kind of awkward curiosity, like he was examining a new acquisition. "He looks healthy," he commented, before turning his attention to some papers he'd brought with him from the bank. He was pleased, of course. The dynasty was secure, but he didn't hold the baby. I don't think he knew how. In that moment, I pitied him. I saw the photograph of the laughing girl in his desk drawer in my mind's eye. He had sealed himself off from this, the most profound connection in the world, because of some past hurt. He could provide for his son financially, but he couldn't give him what mattered most. I knew then that it was all up to me. Bringing Arthur home to that big, silent house was like bringing a lit candle into a dark cave. His cries, his gurgles, his little sighs filled the echoing halls with life. Mrs. Gable, the stern housekeeper, would crack a small, rare smile whenever he was near. The house began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. He was my son, and the entire household began to orbit around him. My days now had a purpose. They were no longer empty stretches of time to be endured, but a busy, chaotic, beautiful cycle of feedings, nappy changes, and sleepless nights. I was exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion, an exhaustion born of purpose, of love. I would sing to him silly little songs I made up myself. Our nursery, which had once felt like a room for a stranger's child, became our sanctuary. I filled it with color and light. I would hold him by the window and tell him about the world, about the fat robin in the garden, and the way the wind rustled the leaves on the old maple tree. My father would visit, of course, puffing out his chest with pride. "A fine boy, Ilara, a fine boy," the spitting image of a finch. I would just smile politely. In my heart, he wasn't a finch or a blackwood. He was just Arthur. He was his own person. As Arthur grew from a baby into a toddler, his personality began to bloom. He was nothing like the quiet, reserved Alistair. He was curious and energetic and full of a boisterous joy that reminded me so much of Leo. He had a loud, free laugh that echoed through the house, chasing away the last of the shadows. Sometimes, when he would run across the lawn, his hair flying, I would catch my breath. It was a painful, bittersweet pang of a life I never got to live. But I never let that pain touch Arthur. With him, I was entirely present. We would make mud pies in the garden, much to Mrs. Gable's dismay. We'd lie on our backs in the grass and find shapes in the clouds. I read him stories every night, not just from the books, but stories from my own imagination, tales of brave knights and faraway lands. I was determined to give him the wild forest, not just a tidy garden. I did learn the truth about my father's lies. It came from an unexpected source, my mother. One afternoon, as we were watching Arthur play, she turned to me, her hands twisting her handkerchief. She was a gentle soul, my mother, and had always been cowed by my father's strong will. But guilt had been eating at her. "Your father. He was wrong to do what he did, Ilara," she whispered, her eyes full of tears. "That boy, Leo, he was a good boy. He left town right after. That night, his family moved away. I heard he joined the army. Your father was so afraid of losing his standing, of the whispers. The bank was threatening to foreclose." She trailed off, unable to say more. I wasn't even angry. It was too late for anger. I just felt a quiet, profound sadness for the two young people who had lost their chance at happiness because of one man's fear and pride. I looked at Arthur, my beautiful, laughing boy, and I knew I wouldn't change a thing. If I had run off with Leo, Arthur would not exist. Life had taken a cruel, twisted path, but it had led me to him. How could I regret the journey when the destination was so precious? My relationship with Alistair remained unchanged. We were polite cohabitants, partners in the business of raising a son. He was a good provider. He never missed a school play or a birthday, attending out of a sense of duty, always looking slightly out of place amongst the other, more boisterous parents. He was proud of Arthur's accomplishments in a detached, academic way, but he never once got on the floor to play with his train set. He never once joined in our mud pie making. He remained behind the wall he had built around his heart. I had found my own love song. It wasn't the passionate ballad I had once dreamed of with Leo. It was a quiet, steady lullaby. It was the sound of my son's laughter, the feeling of his small hand in mine, the warmth of his sleeping body against my chest. It was a different kind of love, a fiercer, more selfless kind, and it was enough. It had to be. But I often wondered, in the quiet moments after Arthur was asleep, what had become of the boy with the moss-green eyes and the loud, free laugh. I hoped, wherever he was, that he had found his ocean. Years passed, as they have a way of doing, smoothing over the sharp edges of the past until they become a dull, familiar ache. Arthur grew from a boisterous boy into a thoughtful young man. He had my curiosity and, to my constant, secret delight, that same joyful laugh that reminded me of another lifetime. He filled the grand, silent house with his friends, with music, with life. He was everything Alistair and I were not: open, warm, and unafraid to feel. Alistair and I settled into a comfortable, if distant, routine. We were a portrait of a successful family: the respected bank president, his elegant wife, and their bright, promising son. No one knew the silence that stretched between us when the dinner guests left, or the separate bedrooms we had occupied for nearly 2 decades. We were partners in a long-running play, and we both knew our lines perfectly. The turning point, the moment the final act of that play began, came not with a bang, but with a cough. Alistair, who had always been a pillar of stoic health, developed a persistent cough that he couldn't shake. He dismissed it as a lingering cold, but it grew worse. His impeccable posture began to stoop, and a grey weariness settled deep in his pale eyes. Finally, at my and Arthur's insistence, he saw a specialist. The diagnosis was stark and unforgiving: lung cancer, advanced, inoperable. The news landed in our quiet world with the force of a bomb. For the first time in our nearly 20 years of marriage, the facade crumbled. Alistair, the man of substance, the man of control, was facing something he could not manage, could not acquire, and could not command. He was dying. His illness progressed rapidly. The big, imposing man seemed to shrink, becoming frail and vulnerable. I became his primary caregiver. It was a strange, new intimacy. For years, we had barely touched, and now I was helping him sit up, bringing him his medicine, reading to him when his eyes grew too tired. In those final months, we probably spoke more to each other than we had in our entire marriage. He didn't speak of feelings, not directly. It wasn't his way. But he would watch me. His gaze would follow me around the room, full of a quiet, unreadable emotion. One afternoon, as I was adjusting his pillows, his hand, now thin and papery, reached out and touched mine. "You have been a good wife, Ilara," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "A good mother." It was the closest he had ever come to saying thank you, to acknowledging the life I had built in the hollow shell of our marriage. I simply squeezed his hand. "You should rest, Alistair." He passed away in the spring, when the first daffodils were pushing their way through the damp earth. The funeral was a grand town affair, exactly as he would have wanted. My father, now stooped and frail himself, stood beside me, looking more bewildered than sad. He had outlived the man he had chosen for me, the man who was supposed to guarantee our family's security forever. Arthur, home from his first year at university, was my rock. He stood tall and strong, greeting the mourners, his face a mask of sorrow and maturity. He had loved his father in his own way, always respecting the quiet, dutiful man he was. After the funeral, after the house was finally quiet again, Arthur and I began the difficult task of sorting through Alistair's belongings. His study, a room I had rarely entered, was now mine to dismantle. It was a meticulous room, everything filed and labeled. It was in the bottom drawer of his large mahogany desk, a drawer I had never had reason to open, that I found it. A small, locked, metal bafta. The key was on Alistair's personal keychain, which now lay on the desk. With a sense of trepidation, I unlocked the box. It wasn't filled with bank documents or deeds as I had expected. It was filled with personal things. The photograph of the laughing girl with the windswept hair was on top. Beneath it was a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon, and under the letters was a single, sealed envelope with my name, Ilara, written on the front in Alistair's precise, neat script. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was dated just a few weeks before he died. "My dearest Ilara," it began, and the salutation alone was so out of character it took my breath away. "If you are reading this, then my time of managing accounts has come to an end. There are things I should have said, debts of a different kind that I have left unpaid. I was never the husband you deserved. I know that. I was a coward." The girl in the photograph was named Isabel. We were to be married. She died in a car accident a month before our wedding. After that, the world lost its color for me. I filled my life with work and duty because they were safe. They could not be taken from me. Then your father came to me. He spoke of a union, of merging our family interests. He showed me your photograph. I saw in your eyes a sadness that I recognized. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that two broken people could make a whole. I was wrong. I was too sealed away in my own grief to ever truly reach you. I saw the love you wanted to give, and I saw you pour it all into our son. You gave Arthur a world of warmth that I was incapable of providing. You taught him to laugh. It is the greatest gift you could have given either of us. I am telling you this not for forgiveness, but for understanding, and to give you something I should have given you long ago. After Isabel died, I made it my business to know things. It was a distraction. I knew of your plan to elope with the mechanic's boy. After we were married, I had my bank contacts look into him, out of some strange, misplaced jealousy, I suppose. He did join the army, served with distinction. When he got out, he used his skills to open his own garage in a small town in Oregon. He married a local girl. He has a family. He made a good life for himself, Ilara. He was a good man. Your father was a fool. I have enclosed the address. What you do with it is your choice. You have spent your entire life bound by the choices of others, your father's and mine. Your duty is done. Arthur is grown. You are free. Go and find your own color in the world. Yours, Alistair. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the crisped paper. Tucked inside the letter was a small slip of paper with an address. Leo. He was real. He was happy he had found his ocean, just in a different place. Alistair, the cold, distant man I had lived with for 20 years, had given me the one thing no one else ever had, the truth and my freedom. He had seen me, truly seen me, all along. The grief I felt then was not for the man I had married, but for the man I had never known, the man who had hidden his own broken heart behind a wall of duty. I grieved for him, for Isabel, for the young, sad girl I had been, and for the boy who had waited for me under an oak tree in the rain. Arthur found me there, sitting on the floor of the study, the letter in my hands. He knelt beside me and put his arms around me. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just held me as I wept, his presence a warm, solid anchor in a sea of rediscovered sorrow and newfound release. The play was over. The stage was empty. And for the first time since I was 18 years old, the next scene was entirely unwritten. The weeks after I read Alistair's letter were quiet and reflective. The grand house, once a symbol of my gilded cage, now just felt empty. Arthur had to return to university for his final exams, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the ghost of a man I was only just beginning to understand. The address Alistair had left me sat on my bedside table, a town I'd never heard of, a life I couldn't imagine. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. What would I even say if I went there? Hello, Leo, remember me? The girl who broke your heart 60 years ago. I just thought I'd pop by. It was absurd. He had a wife, a family, a life. My appearance would be nothing but a disruption, a stone thrown into the peaceful waters of his existence. It wouldn't be fair to him, or to her. No, his story had moved on. His book was written. It was mine that still had a blank page at the end. A few months later, I received a call. My father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. I went to his funeral, the last of my immediate family to go. As I stood by his grave, I felt not anger, not even sadness, just a profound sense of release. His hold on my life, a grip that had directed my path for so long, was finally gone. I looked at his headstone, at the name Blackwood carved into the granite, the name he had sacrificed my happiness for, and I felt a quiet pity for him. He had lived his whole life clinging to a name, while I had discovered that true worth lies in the love you give to a person. He had chased legacy, and I had found life, in the form of my son. After the funeral, I made a decision. I sold the big brick house. It held too many ghosts. I sold my father's house. I used the money to buy this small cottage, the one I'm in now, with its little garden and its view of the rolling hills. It was the first home I had ever chosen for myself. Arthur, having graduated with honors, helped me move in. He was worried, I think, that I would be lonely. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he asked, as we unpacked boxes of old china. "All by yourself out here?" I smiled and touched his cheek. He had Alistair's height, but he had my eyes. "Darling," I said, "I have been all by myself in a crowded room for most of my life. This is not loneliness, this is peace. And it was. I found a simple, quiet joy in my new life. I planted a garden, not a tidy, manicured one like my father's or Alistair's, but a wild, chaotic tangle of flowers. I grew roses that smelled sweet after the rain. I adopted a stray cat who decided my porch was the best place to live. I joined a book club. I learned to bake bread. I filled my small cottage with the scent of yeast and cinnamon, with the sound of a ticking clock that was comforting, not ominous, and with the warmth of a life lived on my own terms. One day, while sorting through the last box from the old house, I found it at the bottom, tucked away in my old jewelry case, the silver locket. My fingers, now gnarled with arthritis, fumbled with the clasp. It was stuck fast, just as it had been for 60 years. On an impulse, I took it to the local jeweler, a kind man with gentle hands. "Can you open this for me?" I asked, "without breaking it, if you can." He took it to his workbench. After a few minutes of careful work, I heard a tiny click. He brought it back to me, open. On one side was the faded, postage stamp-sized photo of two young people, grinning like fools. On the other side, the scratched word, "always." And beneath it, something I had never seen, something my father had never mentioned. Another, smaller piece of paper was wedged in behind the picture. The jeweler carefully eased it out with tweezers. It was a tiny, folded note. In Leo's familiar scrawl, it read, "If you're not there, I'll understand, but I'll never stop loving you, always." So, he hadn't doubted me. He had trusted me, even in the face of my abandonment. My father's web of lies had been even more cruel than I imagined. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had tried to poison the memory itself. Holding that tiny note, I finally wept for the boy I had lost, and for the girl who hadn't been brave enough to trust her own heart. The grief was clean, pure. It was a final rinsing of an old wound. I never went to that address in Oregon. The truth in Alistair's letter and the faith in Leo's note were enough. They closed the circle for me. Leo's happiness was his own victory, and knowing he had achieved it was all I needed. My victory was sitting right here, in this cozy chair, with a warm cup of tea and a heart that was finally at peace. She looks up from her teacup, her eyes clear and bright, directly at the camera. "You see, dear, life will break you. That is a guarantee. It will break your heart. It will break your spirit. It will break your plans into a million tiny pieces. And the world will try to tell you who you are and what your purpose is. My father told me my purpose was to be a respectable wife. Alistair thought my purpose was to provide an heir. But they were both wrong. My purpose was to survive the breaking. It was to find the strength to pick up those shattered pieces and build something new, something that was truly mine. It was to learn to love in a house where there was no love. It was to raise a son who was full of the joy I had been denied. And it was to finally, in the winter of my life, learn to forgive, not for their sakes, but for mine. Forgiveness is not about excusing what they did. It's about taking the key to your own cage out of their pocket and putting it in your own. This old locket, ... She touches it again, a soft smile on her lips, ... It's not a symbol of a lost love anymore. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, a promise of love was real. A reminder that I was loved, and that I learned to love back, fiercely, and with everything I had. It's the story of how I became me, and that, my dear, is a story worth telling. Now, how about another cup of tea?